Right, I guess I'm starting. I think we're calling this press conference because the PPS Board of Education has written a letter to our state legislators about this year's funding cycle. One thing I just want to first start out with is thank you to all our state representatives and senators. I don't envy you the work ahead of you. This is a difficult year. It's been a difficult season, and just the best of luck trying to figure this all out. With that being said, I do want to be just very blunt and straightforward. Please don't balance the budget on the backs of our children. The costs are generational, will last for a long time, and I just want to reiterate that we are here to help collaborate and help work with you to figure out the best way forward so that we can have, at least minimize the impact to our students. One thing I just want to share, this is my third year on the board, and I've only experienced cuts. My first year, we had to cut $30 million. My second year, we had to oversee cutting $48 million. And this year, we're looking at another $50 million in cuts. And I just want to be honest with you, it's not fun anymore. It's pretty difficult. And right now in PPS, the morale is at an all-time low. The stress with our teachers and staff is just very honestly, is very unsustainable. And we're looking at a very dire situation here. And so the key message in our letter is that we want to really stress our legislators to look at ways to find the funds to make sure that we don't cut what we don't have to cut. We're asking our legislators to look at the defunding our tax from the federal tax code. That was a bill that was introduced by Chair Broadman and Nathanson. I also want us to look at tapping into the Education Equity Fund. I know that when that fund was originally created, there were certain triggers that would trigger it to be enacted. However, this is an emergency. 3 years of multi-million-dollar cuts, and the spirit of the law says this is the purpose of the the Stability Fund. Thank you. Stability Fund is to prevent emergencies like this. So we are really urging our legislators to look into that to help preserve our funding in our schools. And lastly, please no more unfunded mandates. Those are very expensive, and we just can't afford them. So thank you. I would like to introduce our superintendent, Dr. Armstrong.
Great, thank you, Chair Wang. I appreciate and will reiterate a $50 million deficit is going to be very impactful for all of our schools across our community. And so any and everything that we can do to advocate and talk with our elected officials about getting the funding for Oregon right, we are here and ready to do. And we are happy to answer any questions that you all may have.
What do you say to parents in the school system who have to tell them really $50 million, and how much of that is left of your budget, what you're cutting?
Yeah, and that's a significant amount. It's about 6 to 7% of our state school fund, and those numbers matter because schools are seeing about 6 to 7% reduction in FTE. And so what I say to parents is have faith that we're going to do everything we can to make sure that our students receive a quality education. And I also know that we have experienced increases in our academic achievement. We've returned to pre-pandemic levels and even higher in some degree in some cases. And so our educators and our students are doing all that they can, and we just need our state and the funds to follow. So I would say be patient, hang in there, ask questions, and advocate.
Dr. Armstrong, I know that state agencies, for example, have to slice, we're trying to reduce their budgets in some ways. I know that school leaders have been concerned for a while that ask may come to schools, but I'm curious, have you heard anything like temperature-wise about that actually being a possibility? At this point in time, what is your gauge on the chances that are actually going to come to school districts?
Well, I think it was actually disclosed today that the revenue forecast is actually up by just under 200 million. And so we're hoping that that is enough to back off any cuts that were going to come if there was a deficit. And so we're excited to hear what news is coming out of Salem, and we'll continue to listen to see other ways that we may be impacted.
Superintendent, give us a little perspective, if you would, with the school budget, all of it, not just the portion that comes from the state. What percent goes to salaries and benefits across the board, from executive all the way down? What percent of the money goes to salaries and benefits?
Yeah, well, the state school fund is really our driver. So if we look at state school fund,
We also have property tax.
and we have grants and those taxes, yes, when you include all of those budgets, with the exception of the bond, I would say about 90% of our funds are spent on personnel. And so that's why when we're looking at a $50 million deficit, we're looking at losing almost 300 FTE. So 90% spent on personnel costs means that the only way to get to 50 million is to reduce the individuals that we employ.
Why is the focus, it seems consistently, on the folks at the lower end of the spectrum who are the boots on the ground in the classrooms, who are the classroom assistants, the classroom aides, the ones that give the support to the kids, when we talk about, the graduation rate, not meeting national, state benchmarks? Why is it consistently cutting those folks?
So oftentimes when there's a budget deficit, we look at some of those supports that we put in place to strengthen classrooms and support teaching and learning. And when there are times of a reduction, those are the supports that we have to look at. The reality in schools is that, we need to keep class sizes small. We need to make sure that we're tending to the mental health of our students. We need to make sure that our facilities are well maintained. We need to make sure that we have all of the resources, the curriculum that's needed to deliver a high quality education. And unfortunately, our funding doesn't match that reality. So things that aren't, I would say, a standard allocation from the state, and things that we put in place to support what's needed in our classrooms are things that we have to analyze first.
Superintendent, in your letter to the legislature, it mentioned that enrollment has gone down. And we've heard from other school districts that enrollment has gone down mainly or partially because of immigration crackdowns. Is that something that you are seeing in your school or in your school district? And the second part of that question is, if enrollment continues to go down, is it reasonable to expect your budget from the state to stay the same when you're not supporting as many students?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so we do have a decline in enrollment. That's a number that we have continued to talk about. And there has been some concern about attendance for some of our students who are immigrant or refugee. And so we are monitoring that. We're expected, as we want to make sure that all of our students are safe and able to access the learning environment. And so that is a high priority of ours. And we need to make sure that we have the classrooms and the supports to send them to. So I'll say that. The second thing that I'll say to your answer is I make sure I cover it. Tell me the second part of that question.
The second part was, if your enrollment is going down, is it reasonable to ask for the same amount of money covering this?
Right. So we're funded on a per pupil basis. And so each year, as we have numbers that are lower, the funds that we get from the state are automatically lower. And I know there's a lot of conversation on, but we look at data and it says that Oregon is actually, funding schools at a high rate on a per student basis. And the other thing that I say to that is, when comparing us to whatever state one compares us to, let's look at unfunded mandates. What are other states asking for, and how is that impacting? Are we fully funding special education? I can tell you no. And that definitely impacts our budget. Transportation is reimbursed, but not at 100%. And we still have obligations to make sure that we get our kiddos, those who have disabilities, those who are experiencing homelessness, those in foster, to our schools every day. And we want them to be there. It's an appropriate ask, We just need the appropriate funds to follow.
And could this decline in enrollment and funding lead to the closure of any schools? Has that been a discussion?
Well, absolutely. We know that it's a community conversation that we're having. We did some work to do boundaries and make sure that we were building Jefferson High School to the comprehensive school that it needs to be, and really just tending to some things in the north and northeast area. But that was just one small area. We're going to continue this spring to engage in conversation around right sizing, looking at our programs in our schools to make sure that we're optimizing the learning environments. We all know that when we pull resources, the support can go further and can bring access to schools that may have not had it. And so it's a conversation we'll have in community, and it'll be ongoing over the next 6 to 9 months, so that next year we're able to have a full conversation of what to expect going forward.
What's the timeline looking like going forward? What do you need to hear from lawmakers on what their plans are going to be before decisions are made for the next fiscal year?
Yeah, so we've put out our proposed budget So right now we're looking at, like I said, just over 300 FTE in that reduction. And we will be pushing out staffing to schools later this week. But the engagement with the board will begin in about another month and a half. And ultimately, they adopt the budget in June. And so if there are any changes and any opportunities to fund differently or shut down unfunded mandates, we would want that to happen in the next several months. So we believe that this short session is the absolutely ideal time.
So that FTE reduction, that's under, essentially, if there's not going to be any more additional funding, is that kind of what I'm understanding it correctly?
Yes, based on the 50 million, that has to happen, unless, of course, there are some funds that are identified at the state level that we can apply, and that will allow us to be able to relook at some of those reductions.
It's a short session. What's your lobbyist down there telling you in terms of the chances of getting any new money?
Yeah, well, do you want to speak to what you're hearing down in Salem?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we're talking a lot. I think that's all, basically the biggest news that comes out of there. I think the budget forecast keeps going up and down, is what we've been hearing. Lately, there was a forecast for maybe some extra monies, but now a lot of that has kind of disappeared most recently. So what we're looking at is trying to push our legislators to look at alternative sources of funding. You know, for example, like the Education Stability Fund. That is something that was set aside. The purpose of it is for times like these. And so in terms of that, it's still early. Yesterday there was already a Ways and Means Committee meeting where they're discussing it, and they're going to continue discussing it. So that's all we have so far.
The sales tax is being floated around down there. Not that it has a lot of traction, but it's something that you would support looking at.
I would definitely support looking into it, yes.
For those that aren't like you are, how does the budget work? They just tell you, here's how much you have to work with. What input do you have? Do you have any input where it goes? Just for those who aren't in it every day like you are.
Yeah, I think that's probably a better
Yeah.
answer for Dr. Armstrong.
Yeah, thank you. So when we receive our state funds, then we, of course, then fund based on the model that we have here. We have a staffing guidebook for our schools that lets us know, like, based on this many students, you get this allocation for like counseling, or, you know, per so many students. Teaching, we have minimums, we have maximums for class sizes and things like that. And so we do have local control and authority of how those funds are distributed to schools. We just need that fund to be enough to be able to cover all of the things that we're expected to do every day.
Can we ask how much of the Education Stability Fund you guys are hoping to tap, or if there's some sort of floating proposal to put how much you're trying to take out?
That's a hard question to answer because I mean, in a perfect world, we have a glass ball to know what it's going to be like next year and the year after. So what our ask is just as much as possible, but obviously reasonable. We would love to be able to keep current service levels at the minimum. So that's where we're at.
And another brief follow-up, I know that some school funding advocates, including some in your own district, have proposed kind of looking into the kicker. Is that another thing that Quote Public Schools endorses, or is something you guys are exploring?
Yeah, I can't speak for the rest of the board because we haven't talked about the kicker, but that is something that I've heard quite a bit, a lot of support among quite a few board members. Yes.
And just in case, more information on unfunded mandates, you did see the Oregonian editorial on Sunday, has a lot of information, and I can give you the numbers from the past 3 years, and you'll see how we went from, in 2023, paying like $500,000 to last year, $2 million and change. So there's a lot of areas of work.
And then out of curiosity, Dr. Armstrong, I know you mentioned earlier that, we may be ranked higher in terms of student spending per state, but that, other states are doing a better job with unfunded mandates, et cetera. Can you give an example? Can you point to a couple of examples of where, you're seeing a state actually properly, deliver?
Well, I would say just across the river in the state of Washington, their funding for special education is a little more comprehensive. They definitely fund at a higher rate than we do. They also are able to access funds for the upkeep and repair of their facilities. As you all know, we have over 100 facility spaces across the district, and we're responsible for the upkeep and maintenance, and that's expensive. And we're very fortunate that our bond supporters, our community, our voters have approved a bond over the years so that we're able to address failing facilities. But that isn't comprehensive and covers all of our sites across Portland. And so those are two examples of just across the river how they're doing things different, and they still have issues as well. I'm not saying that they have the perfect model, but there are some things that they're doing a little bit differently that is making a difference in the classroom and the way in which they staff.
Last one more question, anyone?
I guess at what point, 3 years in a row of a major budget deficit, at what point does all of this stabilize, if you will?
I think that stabilization will come when our funding is appropriate and adequate. I will say that over the last 3 years, as you've heard Chair Wong list out those numbers, we're looking at over $100 million over 3 years. And as I said before, right, we're expected to keep class sizes small. We're expected to tend to the mental health of our students. We're expected to make sure that our facilities are safe, clean, dry, warm, and cool at the appropriate times. We're expected to deliver high-quality education for all of our students. And so in order to be able to do that and to do that well, we have to have the funding that addresses all of those needs. Those things must live together. And when that happens, we'll have financial stability here in Portland Public Schools.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice work.